So this is by Kira TV. 15 million raised, 10 years developed, complete failure.
I'm Richard Garriott, known to some of you as Lord British, the creator of the Ultima series.
This is a story about a game that promised it all, from a legendary developer who had built up trust with his fans.
What's up with the, like, ages of creation, Shroud of the Avatar? Fucking, what's up with the naming? It's always something of the something. Throne of the altar. Fucking... I'm trying not to swear here, but like, what's up with that? What's up with the naming of games these days?
For over a decade, the grandfather of the industry, the man who in some ways gave birth to some of the most
I was a shit of the ass. Yeah, I was about to say something like that. But
popular game genres and mechanics still used to this day. It's a game that he promised to participate in together with his fans. All he needed was their support. Their money, of course. He would deliver an experience unlike anything that existed, a game to shake up the stale MMORPG genre and bring it back to its roots. Instead, players were left disappointed, and tens of millions of dollars that they pledged to create this dream
Lord of the
wasted.
Rings.
This story has a beginning, a middle, and the end is still being written. But let's go back to the start.
Please.
Ultima was one of the, maybe the first MMO, right? And I know that like Ultima 2 or 3 was the first game that had actual like inventory system and all of
Join us
that.
On this adventure. Please consider backing our project. Together we will forge a new world.
Richard Garriott is, well, he's an interesting man.
He's a Padawan.
You might have heard the name
Apparently.
Lord British before. Well, that's Richard Garriott, or at least what he likes to be called. Born in England to two American parents, making him a
we're
dual
watching
citizen
this.
by birth.
I'm gonna end it
Richard's
after that.
dad, Owen, was a NASA astronaut. Richard grew up wanting to follow in his father's footsteps. Instead,
Is this
he was
Chris?
diagnosed.
Is this Chris?
Richard grew up wanting to
This
follow
is
in his
Chris.
father's footsteps. Instead,
Is it?
he was diagnosed with a vision issue at the age of 13, which essentially killed any possibility of making it into the program. At this point, Richard fell back on another passion, fantasy. He'd been exposed to the many brilliant worlds of fiction as an avid reader, the works of Tolkien being one of his all-time favourites, and with the rise of
I guess they
Dungeons
worked on something together?
and Dragons bringing that interactive element, he was hooked. In 1975, Richard was exposed to computers while attending high school, which immediately sparked his creativity. He convinced his school to allow him to create a programming course, one he would direct himself, with the sole purpose of creating video games. Throughout high school, Richard claims to have created 28 or more video games, essentially by himself. And this is what they looked like back then.
Now it's time to battle a dragon. How am I going to do that?
Which is a pretty far cry from what we see being released in the modern era.
Yeah.
This didn't turn out to be a phase, as 5 years later in 1979, Richard was still working hard and still creating games. This time though, they had graphics.
Oh, I fell down a level. I fell down a trapdoor that does reduce your health by a little bit.
A literal game changer. This added an element to his games that were previously missing, and the boss of his summer job at Computerland recognised that fact.
Yep.
He convinced Richard to sell copies of the game.
Actual
as
graphics.
It was truly unlike anything else that existed. Richard spent $200 to bag up copies of the game, along with artwork made by his mother, and started to sell them. Unfortunately, only 12 copies were ever purchased. But one of those 12 made its way to California Pacific Computer Company, and they were very impressed. So much so, they signed a deal with the fresh out of high school genius, which saw over 30,000 copies sold and $150,000 in Richard's pocket. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $600,000 today.
All right.
Richard had just earned more than 3 times his father's astronaut salary, and this was just the very beginning. His game, Akalabeth, is considered the first ever computer role-playing game that was published. He then entered the University of Texas, and continued to develop video games to continue honing his craft. This time with the Ultima series.
I didn't know that he was the guy behind the game.
The games, however,
honestly,
were becoming so popular that it left him completely unable to focus on school, so he left in order to pursue full-time launching of games just as he finished Ultima 2 in the early 1980s. At this stage, Richard and his small group of friends were responsible for some of the earliest known RPG video games and constantly innovating and pushing boundaries on what was thought to be possible during the evolution of early computing. Each new piece of technology released would see Richard testing it, and his sole purpose was to enrich the worlds he was creating for his growing fanbase of role-playing game connoisseurs. It was Richard, his brother, his father, and another man by the name of Chuck. They created their own video game publisher, Origin Systems. Prior to this, they were relying on third-party companies, but they were burned on Ultima 2's release and decided to take matters in their own hands for Ultima 3. A couple of years later, in 1992, Electronic
Now, I don't know why,
Arts
this is
approached
really
with an
interesting.
offer.
Like, I'm getting excited by like just hearing about all this like the first time.
$30 million to purchase Origin Systems, an offer that was quickly accepted. This not only made the Garriots incredibly rich from something they created mostly out of passion, but also gave them the funding to go where no man had gone before, to take the Ultima series and role-playing games to the very next level, where previously the budget of each Ultima game was essentially unpaid labour of those creating it. The next game had a budget on EA's dime of $2.5 million, which sounds like a terribly small sum of money in today's video game market.
Yeah, but back then it was fucking... It was a huge amount of money.
Was a ridiculous amount.
Yeah.
Richard had by this point seen the beginning of a new trend in the RPG genre, one that he hadn't created. It was called the Graphical Multi-User Dungeon, commonly referred to as MUD. Examples being the AOL version of Neverwinter Nights and Meridian 59. These games took place on the internet, another new technology
also
that Richard was
multiplayer,
keen
alright.
to explore. The internet was an insane evolution, much like that of introducing graphics to text-only games, as Richard had been the pioneer of more than a decade before.
Have I heard of the drama about Witcher series and the director saying it was the viewers that were at fault for not appreciating bad writing? Dude, yeah, I've heard. I don't know like about the whole thing. I started watching The Witcher like a couple of months ago, because I wanted to like see if it's any good, and it just wasn't. I didn't like any bit of it. It just made me sick for some reason. Like I just like the writing, the overall mood and all of that, and I just didn't fucking like it at all. So I heard that he said that like the viewers were stupid or whatever. So yeah.
And Richard saw the possibility of what he could do with that formula, as well as where he could improve it. The idea was pitched to EA, and Ultima Online was now greenlit. It was very important to us that Ultima Online be a game with a theme,
which is a shame
story,
because like
and quest, and then
Henry Cavill is a
a
big gamer, and it was like one of his dream roles.
We don't want it to just be player
play as
controlled
that.
and dominated. We want it to be an Ultima experience
But
with
yeah.
all the qualities that people expect from that. Ultima Online will be, I believe, the very first ever completely virtual
What's up,
world
Auburn?
for the mass public to go live out alternate lives in. With a development time of just over 1 year from 1995 to 1996, Ultima Online was already seeing massive praise from the early participants of alpha testing. Unsurprisingly, it wasn't like anything seen before. In current day, when someone announces a game with features that sound unrealistic, we can and usually do call them out. We know enough due to historically what has been possible whether something sounds reasonable. We have access to unprecedented amounts of information, so we are surprised less often than ever before. Back then though, in 1997, people had no idea what to expect because it had just never existed before. The concept of a shared world that you could access from anywhere on the planet, playing with thousands of other humans, owning houses, crafting, gathering materials, fighting players for control of territories, it was completely unfathomable.
Yeah.
But within 6 months of launch, over 100,000 people had already subscribed to the game for a monthly dollar fee. The popularity of his creation and what he did was absolutely legendary. The man who is credited for the first ever published RPG had now launched the revolutionary game Ultima Online and given it a name, an MMORPG, massively
Nice.
multiplayer online role-playing game. A name that sticks with the genre to this day, over 25 years later. Shortly after Meteoric success and in the year 2000, Richard resigned from Origin Systems, his company that was now owned by EA. Once his non-compete expired a year later, he moved to do business with his Korean competitor, NCSoft. While Richard had been birthing a genre in the West, NCSoft had been doing the exact same in Asia with their MMORPG titled Lineage. NCSoft had headhunted this man, and they wanted him to do for them what he did for EA.
Honestly.
They gave him a massive budget and free reign to develop his dream MMORPG with current technology. This was the next chapter in thus far an incredible legacy. For the next 7 years, Richard Garriott developed his dream, a mix between his love of RPGs and his first love, space.
An alien power has awakened in some of us. Over time, it's changing us, evolving us. But change is what we need.
The game, titled Tabula Rasa, was a complete dud. The video game industry was now flourishing and had moved on to bigger and better things. The MMORPG genre had behemoth titles like World of Warcraft by Blizzard Entertainment, and these were dominating player attention.
Dude, the fact that World of Warcraft is still going, and it's as strong as it always was, or maybe even fucking stronger, is amazing to me. I honestly wanted to like get WoW for myself and like try playing it, but I've heard that like you gotta pay to progress faster and all of that, so I didn't like it. But I'm really amazed by the whole thing. Like the fucking community around that game is still like active. The game is still like alive. It's still getting updated. It doesn't look bad at all. It's amazing.
Tabula Rasa was an aged product even prior to launch, and did nothing much to refine the formula. Within the year of launch, Richard Garriott and NCSoft parted ways. This time, Richard was regressing to his prior life goals. He now wanted to go to space, not as a NASA astronaut, but as a private and incredibly wealthy citizen. This venture from Earth to the International Space Station cost Richard $30 million. This made him the second ever second-generation man in space, being that his father had also made the trip. Upon return, Garriott continued his civil lawsuit against NCSoft for their handling of his employment, a case that he won, awarded $28 million.
Look, as much as I would love to see space and go over there and just like experience the whole thing, isn't it a bit like egocentrical and narcissistic to spend $30 fucking million just to go there so you as a single person can experience it? Like if I had that much money, I wouldn't like that kind of money. I wouldn't spend it on myself on a thing like that.
Essentially paying off his entire space adventure. With cash in hand, goals accomplished, and a newfound independence, he was now faced with infinite options. He was already an accomplished man, he could leave it all behind. Already a pioneer, literally going where almost no man went before, creating things that brought joy to millions of people's lives, and cementing his name in history in multiple industries. But the man who created that legacy did so with an attitude to never give up. Yes, his reputation had taken a hit from Tabula Rasa, but that could partially be blamed on NCSoft's part in the development, which by accounts was very troublesome. Could he really let this be the end of his saga? In 2009, still in between decisions,
Scarred is the
Garriott,
same thing.
longtime business partner,
like there's so many things that you can spend your money on that are creative, that would help the humanity, that will help other people. Like spending $250,000 on making a restaurant that will like employ people is better than like just buying things that in the end are gonna make you money, right? Is better for the humanity than just like spending it like burning the fucking money to go and see the Titanic or whatever, go to space at this point. If he like donated $30 million to NASA or whatever, I'll be completely fine with it.
new company called Portalarium.
Never heard
This
of it.
company originally dabbled in creating games for Zynga to launch on the Facebook gaming marketplace until the entire marketplace crashed a few years later. At this point, he made another
I
life-changing
understand.
decision.
Scarred.
Richard Garriott would return to the past, back to Ultima. He was going to bring the legendary title into the future, or at least enough of the feeling and features to be considered a direct successor, but without the name. The company
Right.
Portalarium was now repurposed, and with it came a promise. Lord British had returned, and with
Lord
him,
British.
the future of massively multiplayer online role-playing games would be changed forever.
And I, as Lord British, will be with you in the game, and together we will forge this new world. I would like to invite you to join me and our team on the grand adventure of creating the next great role-playing game. As a modern reincarnation of what made your avatar's adventures so compelling for the last few decades, I invite you to join us in the creating of Shroud of the Avatar.
The Kickstarter launched on March 8th, 2013, asking for a modest sum of $1
Oh, this is after the success of Star Citizen. Okay,
million
figures.
US. The project trailer featured the man, the myth, the legend himself.
Look, I'm not gonna
Describe-
lie. There's a movie that we did, short-ish movie that we did here that we crowdfunded on Kickstarter, and one of the reasons why it was Kickstarter is because of the success of Star Citizen and even stupid projects. I remember like potato salad. It was just like a potato salad, and the guy said, if I get like $60,000, I'm gonna make potato salad, and he did, and he got the money. Like, come on.
Describing what to expect from what he called the next great role-playing game. Fans from around the world immediately started paying attention. After all, this man created what many to this day still consider one of the greatest innovations in the industry.
Indeed.
Not just that, but a game that has never truly been replicated in thought and feeling. How could they not give this man another chance? Especially
It's the
when
same with Chris Roberts, dude. It's the same with Chris Roberts. Like, I'm watching this and I'm thinking, like, I didn't know that this guy was behind all these projects, honestly. Which is amazing. Like, what's up with the old dudes and like having all these like accomplishments and then just like instead of like having that name echo in the gaming community or like programmer or whatever gaming development community, you do stuff like this that just like
alternative was to play the
make
latest
you
AAA
weird.
MMORPG created entirely for a casual audience and without much of the flair or flavor
Yeah, they know
of
each other, we
worlds
know that.
Richard Garriott had spent the last 40
We
years
saw the picture.
creating. As for Richard himself, he arrived just
was
in
he
time.
less successful because Wing Commander was fucking huge. Starlancer and the Freelancer were pretty good, pretty fucking good in the sales department.
People were desperate for new games, and Kickstarter had provided an avenue for those games to be created. Finally, players could finance ideas themselves and break their tether to whatever corporations willed for them to consume. So the pitch was simple: change the status quo. Role-playing games, in Richard's words, had focused too much on the level grinding and not enough on the role-playing. The worlds looked better, they sounded better, but they were too linear, too closed. No longer did players live in the world, participating in an immersive experience. Instead, they performed tasks, checked boxes on a list, and largely shared an identical experience to one another.
Yeah, that's
Shroud of
true.
the Avatar
That
would
is
go
true.
back to when this was not the case. You would choose a role to play: an adventurer, an explorer, a trader, a crafter, a gatherer, all with
But
branching
also, it
paths.
needs to keep you. New games need to keep the players occupied, because if you just make a sandbox, like that's why Space Engineers didn't have that much success. It did have some success, but it wasn't the most like successful space game ever, because like it's a sandbox. There's too much shit to do there, right? And players don't want to do that. Like, you need to like fucking hold their hand and guide them through the fucking game. But still, it doesn't have to be on rails, because if it's on rails, then in shit, then like give us an open world game like GTA 5, for example, but make it be basically on rails. But whenever we want to do something else, we can do it.
of gameplay.
Ryan is not
Deep enough to
content.
satisfy
Yeah.
and wide enough to remain interesting for years to come. Not only that, but worlds
That is
full
true.
of consequences, as choice.
But also, like, some players fucking love grinding. I have a couple of friends that just like want to grind. That's like Diablo 4 released. Like the day after that, I was playing, and my friend like sent me a message like, "What you doing? I can see you're playing Diablo 4." And I was like, "Yeah, you wanna play?" And I was like a level 12, and he was like a level 60 immediately because he was just grinding.
It's meaningless.
Yeah, the
without.
whole content of Star
On a
Citizen
technical
is
level,
grinding.
Promises were made. A fully interactive world, meaning if you see anything, it will do something. A deep original fiction created alongside prolific writer Tracy Hickman. Not only that, but an option to experience the game anywhere with a solo or offline game mode function. All the features included classless character systems, giving players the freedom required to navigate an open experience and change their mind as they do, player housing in a persistent open world giving land value and prestige, deep crafting, a player-driven economy, meaningful player versus player, and much, much more. The campaign saw immediate buzz, not just from potential backers, but industry professionals and media outlets. While not everyone supported crowdfunding, it was a relatively new frontier, and it was impossible to follow the industry and not be curious about where it would go, especially with such a prestigious, experienced leader at the helm. Some backers, however, believed much more than others, 11 of which purchased a $10,000 package
Jesus
offering a tour
Christ.
of Lord British's house, which he called the Britannia Manor, named after a region in the Ultima games. Less insane, 5 individuals parted with $5,000 each, and 37 individuals threw down $3,000 or $3,500 each to claim a rent-free city plot and wander the game's world with the one-time available title of Lord, emulating the creator, Lord British himself. Within 30 days of the backing window of Kickstarter, the project, which initially asked for $1 million, managed to raise just over $1.
In our Kickstarter that I was a part of, I'm saying our even though it wasn't mine, but I was a part of it. We had a businessman like put in a lot of money into the project during the Kickstarter. He pledged on the Kickstarter, but he wanted something in return, and he got money in return, and he got promotion in return as like a whatever banner or fucking logo at the end of the movie. So yeah,
1.9. This came from a total of 22,300.
but like just having a plot
making it one of
in
the
a
most
game that you're
successful
hoping that
Kickstarter
is going to be
projects of the
made,
time, and maybe
I don't know,
more
dude.
importantly, proving a point to the entire industry.
I would
Fans
never do
were
that.
willing to put their money where their mouth is for products that interested them, even without a single slide of gameplay being shown, and there was tens of thousands of people out there who wanted a change in this genre.
Is
Throughout
this
the next
actual
few
gameplay
years,
from
a lot happened.
the game itself? Because it looks
But before
bad.
that, we have to address the fortuitous timing of Lord British and his game's arrival.
I don't
Maybe
play Star Citizen
coincidence,
anymore.
or maybe
honestly.
a long-term plan. The question remains without answer.
I will with
The
320,
reality, Kickstarter was
but
on a
probably
short fuse, and it burned quickly.
take a break
From
after
the first
that.
MMORPG
Again,
funded on the platform in 2012, Pathfinder Online, to March
I know
of
the Star
2013
Citizen
when
sold
Shroud of the
plots.
Avatar
Yeah, I know.
arrived, there was only a couple MMOs funded on the site. One being Star Citizen, who raised over $2.1 million during their 30-day campaign.
Yep.
Funnily enough, Chris Roberts, the Star Citizen leader, is a personal friend of Richard's and perhaps nudged him in the Kickstarter direction. It seemed like the platform was the new place to fund dreams, and projects were raking in millions of dollars for very little to show. This, however, was not going to last. Within a couple of years, the audience learned very hard lessons about crowdfunding through sites such as Kickstarter. One such lesson: MMORPGs cannot be created on a shoestring budget, even if the legendary developers are involved. From Shroud of the Avatar in 2013, enthusiasts funded multiple titles until mid-2015. Those included Camelot Unchained, another spiritual successor to a beloved game called Dark Age of Camelot, Crowfall, which was a spiritual successor to Shadowbane, Chronicles of Valeria, a new title that promised features never before explored, such as permadeath of player characters as a subscription model, and rebirth to new avatars to carry on a family legacy. These games, along with a handful of
Star Citizen, anyone? Death of a Spaceman, anyone?
Others managed to slip into the public eye during a time when nobody knew any better. They climbed the ladder of public funding and then pulled that ladder up behind them, not due to greed, but due to negligence, malevolence, or incompetence. Over the next few years, each of these games proved to not exist, show little to no progress, or require far more money than they initially stipulated. Star Citizen, for instance, crowdfunded an initial ask of $500,000 in October of 2012, promising a 2014 release date, and they've since raised over $600 million, and despite having a playable alpha version with impressive tech, has not delivered a finished game, let alone the 2 games that were initially promised.
No, Kira, you know better than this. It wasn't 2 games, it was 1 game. Do I need to show you again? Kickstarter. Let me show you this again. Just so I can, like, be certain that nobody's gonna tell me in the comments that I'm not, like, that this is not true. Let's search for game mode. Fuck me, it's not game mode. Mode? Yeah. So, the Kickstarter is called Star Citizen, right? And then you have, where is it? Squadron 42 is a Wing Commander style single player mode, playable offline if you want. That was the Kickstarter. And then in 2016, they split it into 2 games. By the way. I'll be back in a second, I'm gonna play it.
Delivered a finished game, let alone the 2 games that were initially promised. Shroud of the Avatar was never as grand as that, though they did continue to sell backer items and raise money from the public for years to come, considerably more money than they claimed to have needed for a full released game. The initial pitch was $1 million, but by the time full release came, it was in the tens of millions instead. Despite that, Shroud of the Avatar suffered from its own unique problems that became increasingly more pronounced as time went on. Unlike many of the games featured in this video series, however, Shroud of the Avatar did release, but that, like many other games,
I didn't
was
know
just
that.
the beginning of the end.
I thought it was like an early access and it never fucking actually got finished.
For Richard's return to glory.
Wait, what?
Games.
Let me see this again. There's 754 reviews. Really? That's odd. Let me see. Oh no. Okay, so there's 3,000 reviews, which is still odd. It's all mixed, which is still odd for a game that made like 15 million before it fucking got finished, but sure.
Was just the beginning of the end for Richard's return to glory.
Yeah, it's only when I'm
following the end of the
a bit pissed
Kickstarter on
off,
April
honestly.
7th, 2013,
Don't
the
you worry.
hype was now real. The community was flourishing, bringing in fans of the Ultima series and newcomers alike. Whether people had played what Richard made all those glorious years ago, or heard about it on forums discussing greater days of gaming, the excitement was clearly visible. The community grew across many social media platforms, and discussions revolved around when Shroud of the Avatar releases, as if it was all but guaranteed. And those fans didn't need to wait for long. Unlike his competitors, who were raising millions of dollars, with just the promise of a future of brilliant online role-playing games, Richard was keen to deliver his to market first. Just over a year and a half later, Shroud of the Avatar Forsaken Virtues released onto Steam Early Access, taking advantage of the popular avenue of beta release with a price tag to continue their already swelling crowdfunding. To those of you familiar with this video series, you would expect this to be the point I talk about how the review score was mostly negative, that the game was an obvious asset flip mess, which delivered on zero promises and was essentially abject garbage.
Is this the gameplay?
But maybe this is an exception.
It's so
as
bad.
That was not the case. The reviews were largely positive, but there is a story to be told in the reviews themselves. Negative reviews speak of expectation, how players expected an old school game more in line with the classic Ultima Online. What they were delivered was old school in design and implementation, but not for the right reasons. The game was released with dated combat, dated graphics, and dated vision, but without the nostalgic feel or hardcore focus that the original fans expected. In fact, the monetization was likely the only modern element of the game to this stage, with the Kickstarter and crowdfunder backing rewards acting like a cash shop to sell the most valuable items in the game, such as city land plots and housing, to those who trusted this vision early. This removed a massive element of the game's ability to appeal to the old school audience.
Oh, Jared? Jerry's playing Baldur's Gate? Yeah, I never saw him playing Star Citizen either.
Was the target of Richard to fund the game in the first place. On the other hand, the positive reviews mostly speak of expecting what is to come and how good it was going to be, not of what it currently was. They talked of the foundation for the future, about a trustworthy man with a capable team and the building blocks to create the next great gaming experience. When they did discuss the current game, they said it was buggy, it lacked content, lacked clear vision, and was almost entirely placeholder as a game in Richard's own words. But at least it was playable, it was real, and this set it apart.
Puppeteer, you're wrong. You're completely wrong. That never happened. That never happened. Completely wrong. Check the Kickstarter. Also, because of my video where I said that you have Salty Mike that watched the whole, it's not Citizen Con, but the whole like presentation from 2012 during the Kickstarter, and it was called Star Citizen, and it was Star Citizen only with Squadron 42 as a single-player game mode, and that's it. Like Squadron 42 was never the primary thing, the main project. Now it is somehow, but yeah. Anyway,
from almost all other Kickstarter projects, let alone MMORPGs. Of course, time would fix these things, these problems that people were talking about. Time would create the game people had paid millions of dollars for. Unfortunately, time also revealed Richard's dream for an altogether different experience from what was initially promised. Moving forward, by 2016, the game was in a much better shape in terms of playable content, though still nowhere near close to being a fully released game. The cash shop, however, was coming along real well. Players who missed out on the ground floor of a Kickstarter pledge and looking to own their own land in this ambitious new game were directed to what they called the Crown Store. As Richard said during an interview, quote, "To be a property owner, you really need to be in the game for $100 to $150. And this price went through the roof if you wanted to own something luxurious.
Black Dream Hunt
in fact,
3.
The price for a castle was around $12,000
Go watch
US.
The original Kickstarter video and all of the Kickstarter videos. And, like, do yourself a favor and do that, and you will, like, next stream when I'm on, say hello and tell me that I was right.
That isn't to say you couldn't work towards some of the.
I don't know who started that whole thing. It's with the it's the same. It's the Mandela effect. It's the Luke, I'm your father, which he never said. He said I'm your father, and that's it without Luke. But somehow somebody started the whole thing that, like, people now for some reason think that Squadron 42 was the original project. It wasn't.
For in-game currency, but the top end.
I was there. Oh, for fuck's sake. Yeah, Salty Mike was also there. All of us were also there. And then he fucking spent the whole stream of 5 hours watching all of the fucking videos to see that I was right. Law, I disagree.
Restricted to the pay pigs and
then you asked me why I smoke so much.
This was not a new concept in online worlds. Garrett's famed Ultima Online had players selling their prime housing locations on eBay for thousands of dollars all the way back in 1997, but that was against the rules, and this time Garrett was designing the game around being the dealer of these goods instead. The issue with this being, of course, once a developer is incentivized to sell items within the game, they are also incentivized to design the game to be worse for people who do not.
So they're flipping assets, but also like selling them for
purchase
for a bunch of money.
This was exactly the direction that was scaring off the initial hardcore fans who flocked to the project solely because of Lord Rich's involvement. He claimed to be the savior to return the once hallowed player-first experience in the genre, and it was now becoming clear to all that was never going to happen. Instead, it seemed like it was money first. Despite this, development continued and millions of additional funding was pouring in from players who were admittedly enjoying the game thus far,
Yeah,
as well as
the game
promise shown for
became a
continuation
gateway
of
for a
progress.
cash shop.
The game was,
Exactly.
of course, never incredibly popular in terms of online users,
Mhm.
but full release would be expected to fix that.
Wait,
Before then, though,
605 players? Amazing.
the question of bankruptcy loomed in the minds of fans.
Yeah, that's
A
exactly
website
what
appeared
Star Citizen has
seeking
become.
additional funding,
It's just like fucking Ad Citizen, honestly.
presented from Richard Garriott himself, claiming to be selling stakes in the company via a platform called Seed Invest.
And that's why Star Citizen might die, because people might realize what it is. But then again, there's always like new cows to like. How do you say that? To milk, Jesus Christ, to milk. So there's always going to be new players. So you never know what's going to happen.
The first issue was that for Seed Invest to accurately represent the company to potential investors, they needed financial data. Players discovered this data and immediately pointed out the issue. Despite over $10 million being raised by this stage, the company currently had $528,000 remaining, with a monthly burn rate of $230,000, giving them just over 2 months remaining before the well would run dry and the company would have to cease operation.
We don't say milk is mleko in Serbian, but to milk a cow, you would say muzeti, which is not milk. So my brain
Without
didn't
raising
work for a
additional
second.
funds. With this being the case, perhaps the Steam reviews were wrong, and time would not bring them a finished product. Maybe they'd just run out of time instead. Richard Garriott immediately went on the press tour, speaking to Kotaku and clearing up what he called confusion. The money they were trying to raise was not to prevent bankruptcy, but instead to allow expansion of the company. Portalarium, according to him, always had roughly the same money in the bank and generated enough in revenue each month to essentially remain even, which could be believed if that was the only issue. However, it wasn't. Instead, keen-eyed fans started to point out that the Seed Invest portal displaying Shroud of the Avatar to potential investors was full of, let's say, mistakes. That's a very polite way to put it. Many users pointed out that the pitch displayed technology and features that simply did not exist. Richard also addressed this, though he openly admitted to there being some what he called inaccuracies. In essence, this pitch was using incorrect information in order to try to draw in additional funds from a community who had already given more than they should, but luckily this time knew better. At the same time, he was hoping to draw in unsuspecting investors who simply didn't know what they were being sold and how it was partially a little bit of a lie.
Listen, this happened with CAG was really good with it, like extinguishing the fire with you already mentioned selling the plots for Star Citizen, because back in what was it, 2016 or something like that, you could have like sold. You could have bought plots of land where you would like build a base. Now the plots come with the Pioneer. If you buy a Pioneer, you get a plot. So if you buy a Pioneer from the shop, you get like a bigger plot. If you buy it in the game, you're gonna go get a smaller plot or whatever. It doesn't matter. But the community fucking reacted. They got pissed off and they just like CAG removed it from the store, and that was that. But yeah, it's Puppeteer. No, it's not opinion. You can't have opinion. You can have only facts. Yes, memory could be fucking. Like, why are we still talking about this? I have proven this already. This is why I took a break, honestly, because I need to prove myself and prove the facts every week, constantly to other people that say something else because they didn't watch that video, and then I gotta fucking refer them to that video, and then they don't want to watch that, but they want to argue. So I never understood that, honestly. Anyway, I was saying the CAG is really good at extinguishing fires, which they did with the plots.
Not to worry.
Scandal.
But what else is he going to say? Everybody panic. We're out of money, and
you think it will come back? I don't think so.
Which they did.
Maybe in
Full
another
release
form.
Arrived on the 27th of March 2018, and this time I can say that the Steam review score is more in line with what you would expect from Kickstarter to core, though likely still the best this series has seen to date. It's important to note this graph with positive to negative reviews is misleading.
Also, I don't know what you send me
up
at here because I don't see it on the screen.
The split of
You're gonna link it to me on
this
Discord.
Next big thing game that was promised, only around 120 people felt the need to leave reviews. The game peaked out on launch day with 562 players.
Oh wow.
Less players
This
than
is
on
so
average
bad.
play random Ultima Online private servers, even though that game released in 1997 and this in 2018. Shroud of the Avatar at this stage had raised easily.
The other good thing is that CAG is doing is that they're not tied to Steam at all. Therefore, you can't see the peak amount of players or the currently active players.
Over $15 million from over 50,000
No, it's fine,
users,
Puppeteer, I love you.
but less than 600 of them were logging into the service concurrently for what was claimed to be the biggest day in the game's history, the full release finally materializing. Unfortunately, this is also where things started to get much worse, which shouldn't really have even been possible, as things were already kind of rock bottom for the game and the fans. Richard, however, was keen to explore the unknown as he did previously in life, so at this point, he felt that rock floor beneath him and started to drill down, aiming for the Earth's core instead. Kickstarter physical rewards that had been sold over 4 years ago were still not fulfilled. No one could get an answer, and the game was still missing promised features from that same Kickstarter page. Founders of the company were leaving, such as Dallas Snell, who was there from the very beginning. The company had already faced one round of layoffs just 2 months after the game had launched. And now, the man who was the face and voice of the entire project, Richard himself, stepped down as CEO.
Oh,
Fans,
wow.
of course, felt like this was a literal slap in the face for all those who believed in him, those that were fans of his games for up to 4 decades. It was really a very confusing turn of events, especially when Garrett reached out to publication MMORPG.com to inform them that he did not resign and that they as a company had just decided to remove the term executive from all roles, especially considering his was the only one that was ever on the website in the first place, and technically all companies are required to have a CEO on paper. Whatever the reason, he now didn't consider himself
He's really using his like
CEO.
photo. I guess it's his like biggest accomplishment. So he's using his NASA photo.
To have a
but yeah.
CEO on paper. Whatever the reason, he now didn't consider himself CEO. This raised many questions. Who was in charge? What could make Lord British give up that role? And how could this be a good direction? But most importantly, what did this mean for the very near future? Fans of the project who had supported it with tens of millions of dollars as a combined effort, mostly due to Richard himself, didn't have to wait very long to get answers to these questions. A few days later, the buy-to-play game, lauded as the future of online multiplayer role-playing games, announced their transition to a free-to-play model.
Because they needed players.
To absolutely nobody, and perhaps a chance to draw in some much needed fresh blood.
Yep.
Unfortunately, as with almost everything besides raising money from naive fans, this did not work. Looking at the Steam data for active players, you wouldn't even know or notice that the game had opened up to hundreds of millions of potential Steam players to flow in for the low price of nothing. The free-to-play launch saw the player base gain roughly 50 average players. This, along with the constant mismanagement of expectations, led
You know
to the
what?
next dose
Like a
of
couple
bad
of
news.
thousand would still be bad, but this is terrible.
Travian Games, Shroud of the Avatar's publisher, dropped the game from their roster, leaving the game entirely without publisher support.
Wow.
3 months later, and a constant decline in fan opinions, Portalarium faced their second round of layoffs. If we remember back, Richard Garriott claimed that the Seed Invest portal was to raise money to expand the team. By this stage, there was almost no team left, and just how mismanaged was this whole project, as they were now firmly in the death spiral. If they couldn't stem the bleeding while having more staff and a publisher, what could they hope to do after losing both? But that strangely wasn't even the worst part. When Portalarium upsold their game's features in order to raise funding with actual shares of the business, these people who purchased them were official investors, which should have afforded them protections as well as access to financial records and reports. After all, they apparently now owned percentages of the company. According to these investors, however, they were being stonewalled, or more accurately, ignored entirely. Multiple investors were in contact with the Seed Invest platform, and Seed Invest were constantly reaching out to Portalarium. But there was no response, as well as there were absolutely no financial records being disclosed at all. These people, who by law should have been involved, were as much in the dark as the original Kickstarter backers, who had absolutely no protections at all. And it wasn't just investors or players who were left without light. The Securities and Exchange Commission also failed to receive a report from Richard Garrett's Portalarium. Somewhere around this time, the company also closed their physical offices, claiming that this was just a temporary move. But as you could guess, it was not temporary. In fact, Portalarium announced a few months later that they had sold the entirety of the company, the game, and assets to a brand new company called Catnip Games.
Why even lie that much? Jesus Christ, he's not stepping down as CEO, even though he is. We're changing the name. We're just moving, guys. Why even fucking lie that much if you have 500 people that bought the game? Or like 3,000 people that bought the game or got it for free, and you have like 100 active users. What's the point?
Fans quickly searched the internet to find who Catnip Games was, and they discovered something strange. Chris Spears, who was the previous president of Portalarium alongside Lord British's leadership, was the CEO of Catnip. A very confusing turn of events.
Were they like money laundering? Money laundering? Like, what's happening here? Why would they buy it from themselves?
Catnip. A very confusing turn of events, essentially completely removing Richard Garrett's business from the equation, despite it existing solely due to his own involvement. From there, it would be getting into the weeds to continue discussing Shroud of the Avatar, as the game has floundered.
Who would even buy that kind of a company that had
seeing some updates
that kind of a
and
failure
exists almost entirely for the disgruntled fans to make fun of or question what happened during each subsequent controversy. Fans did, however, get some answers as to where Richard Garrett had gone after wasting their money and abandoning them. He went to the same place as other once legend but now fallen from grace game developers from beloved days gone by, straight to the blockchain. In August of 2022, fans discovered, without surprise but with disgust, that Richard was developing an NFT.
Look, I didn't know about any of this, but I was about to say, first of all, the biggest losers here, and I'm not bashing on them, I'm just saying like they lost a lot, were the guys that fucking paid in the Kickstarter, like they paid 3,500 or whatever, and there was like one guy that fucking paid $10,000 for the game to be made, just to have this, which is shit, to also have to buy assets in the game, right? And then it avoids paying debt. Okay, understandable. Okay, you're a banker, right? So you would know more than I do, obviously. And I was about to say, like, imagine this guy fucking scamming again. Because it could happen, right? Because, like, yeah, not enough people knew about whatever, Shroud of the Avatar or whatever the fucking game is called. He's probably going to do it again. And then, like, no, there's more to the video. He's fucking doing NFTs. Amazing.
The title was revealed as Iron and Magic. Luckily, as I write this video almost a year later, Iron and Magic has mysteriously vanished, much like Richard's involvement in the future of online role-playing games and the respect of his longtime fans. Catnip Games and Chris Spears claim Shroud of the Avatar is still being fully supported and will be going nowhere, but anyone familiar with the project should probably know better. The game will continue to go where it has been going since the initial early access release in 2014, and that is down further and further.
You know what? If I was like a CEO of a gaming company, I would hire this guy as a consultant, just to like hear whatever he has to say and do it like completely differently. Just not fucking listen to him at all, ever. But I will pay him for his shit opinions and like marketing tactics and all of that, and not listen to him. Like, always do the other thing, the contrary, right?
After all, it's impossible to trust the word of people who have repeatedly proven themselves untrustworthy. Many legendary game designers and developers find themselves exactly where Richard Garriott now exists. Time and time again, they tarnish their legacy by trying to relive past glory and prove either to their fans or to themselves that they still have what it takes to roll back the years and change history again. Rarely, if ever, does this go to plan. The most often result is a headline that makes gamers collectively groan in unison, typically with the once greats of the industry dipping their toes into the sewer that is blockchain gaming, chasing the trend of what outwardly looks like greed or vanity. Hopefully Richard leaves his legacy alone from now and goes back to being remembered as the pioneer of the RPG and the MMORPG genres. But the last game in his legacy will go down as an abject failure, a game that has no right to really exist, as it was willed into existence on reputation alone. Sky-high expectations, which delivered nothing but disappointment, limping along now, exhausted, pretending that things are okay, waiting to be put to rest, just like its creator's legacy, hopefully never to be seen again.
Hopefully, but no, actually we currently have Star Citizen, which is not the same thing, but it's like so fucking close to it, honestly. All right, there's the video. It's a very good video. Thank you, Jack, for sharing this with me. I didn't know any of this. Jesus Christ.